Chapter 3, Section 4, The Culture of the Ancient Egyptians. Imagine writing a school report or a letter to a friend using pictures instead of letters. A picture of an eye would stand for the letter I. A wavy line, or a wave on the sea, would stand for the letter C. When you put the two of them together, you would form the word icy. This is similar to the idea behind Egyptian picture writing. Questions to think about throughout this section. How did the Egyptians live their daily lives? What scientific contributions did the Egyptians make to society? Key terms that are defined for you through the Google Classroom: hieroglyph, papyrus, astronomer. Key people: Jean-Francois Champollion. Please make sure to have your notes available as you watch the video to complete and submit through the Google Classroom after you have watched the video. His name was Uni, and he was an Egyptian noble of the Old Kingdom. His life story, a success story, is recorded in his tomb. Uni began his career in a simple way, running a storehouse. Later, he moved up the ladder to groundskeeper of the Royal Pyramid. In this job, he oversaw the quarrying and delivery of stone for the pyramid. Uni must have worked hard because later he was made a general. Then, he became governor of Upper Egypt, in charge of goods and taxes for half the kingdom. By the time of his death, we learned that Uni was a royal tutor at the palace and an honored companion of the pharaoh. Everyday life of the ancient Egyptians. Most of what we know of the everyday life of the Egyptians is based on paintings that cover the walls of tombs and temples. These paintings show royalty and ordinary people involved in all aspects of life. Written records also tell us much about their lives. Like Uni, they were busy and hard-working people. They also had a sense of fun and a love of beauty. Social classes. Egyptian society itself resembled a pyramid. At the very top stood the pharaoh. Beneath him was a small upper class. This group included priests, members of the pharaoh's court, which would be viziers, and as well as nobles who held large estates. The next levels were the middle class, made up of soldiers, merchants, scribes, and skilled workers. At the base of the pyramid was by far the largest class, the peasants. Mostly the peasants did farm labor, but they also did other kinds of labor, such as building roads and temples. A person could even rise to a higher class. Generally, the way to rise was through service to the pharaoh, as Uni knew. Prisoners captured in wars were made slaves. Slaves formed a separate class, which was never very large. Egyptian society was flexible, however. Even slaves had rights. They could own personal items and inherit land from their masters. They could also be set free. Lives of the peasants. Although peasants could own land, most worked the land of wealthier people. During the season of the flood, the peasants worked on roads, temples, and other buildings. As soon as the water left the land, the fields had to be planted. This had to be done quickly while the soil was still moist. One farmer plowed the black earth with a team of oxen, while another followed behind him, scattering the seeds. The harvest was the busiest season for the Egyptian peasants. All men, women, and older children went into the fields to gather the crops of wheat or barley. Work went on from sunrise to sunset. Once the crops were gathered, the villagers feasted. Everyone made sure to offer food and drink to the gods in thanks for their help. Egyptian women, an active role. Egyptian women were looked upon as living models of Isis, the wife of Osiris. They had most of the rights that men had. They could own property, run businesses, and enter into legal contracts. For the most part, women traveled about freely. Egyptian paintings often show them supervising farm work or hunting, and women had many occupations, from priestesses to dancer. Noble women held a special position in Egyptian society. Sometimes they were in charge of temples and religious rites. They could also use their position to influence the pharaoh. Some women acted as regents until the pharaoh was old enough to rule on his own. Achievements of the Egyptians. From the records of the ancient Egyptians, we know that they possessed an amazing amount of knowledge. They made more important advances in such fields as writing, astronomy, and medicine. Among the people of the ancient world, Egypt was known as a land of great learning. A new system of writing. In ancient Egypt, as in Mesopotamia, ideas were written down in picture-like symbols called hieroglyphs. In this script, some pictures stand for ideas or things. For example, 2 legs mean go. Other pictures stand for sounds. For example, a drawing of an owl stands for M, as in mother. The Egyptians began to use hieroglyphs because they needed a better way to keep track of the kingdom's growing wealth. As the Egyptian empire grew, it became necessary to create more pictures for more complicated ideas. At first, the Egyptians wrote on clay and stone, as the Sumerians did, but they needed more convenient writing surfaces. They found it in papyrus, which is an early form of paper made from a reed-like plant found in the marshy areas of the Delta Nile. They first cut the stalks of the plant into narrow slivers. Then they soaked the slivers and pounded them flat. Left out in the air to dry, the pieces of papyrus became stiff. Joined side by side, the pieces formed a long roll. Here you can see an example of what papyrus would have looked like when completed and written on. Unlocking a mystery. The meanings of the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphic writing was lost after the AD 400s. Scholars could not read the mysterious pictures. It wasn't until about 200 years ago, in 1799, that an important find took place. A soldier digging a fort near the Nile found a large black stone with 3 different types of writing on it. The upper part showed hieroglyphs. The middle part showed a different form of hieroglyphs. And the lower part showed Greek writing. This stone is called the Rosetta Stone because it was found near Rosetta, a city in the Nile Delta near the Mediterranean Sea. Many scholars tried to use the Greek letters on the Rosetta Stone to figure out the meaning of the hieroglyphs, but it was not an easy task. Then, in the 1820s, a young French scholar named Jean-François Champollion finally figured it out. When Champollion published his results, a new window onto the world of the ancient Egyptians opened. Keeping track of time. Because they were an agricultural people, the Egyptians needed to be able to predict when the Nile would flood. This was the work of the Egyptian astronomers, scientists who study the stars and other objects in the sky. They noticed that the Nile appeared to rise rapidly about the same time that they could see Sirius, the dog star, in the sky shortly before sunrise. They worked out the average time between the appearances of the star. They found that it came to 365 days. This became the length of their year. Medicine. Probably because of their work on mummies, the ancient Egyptians knew a great deal about the body. By studying the body, they learned to perform surgery. They could set broken bones and treat injuries of the spine. The Egyptians also practiced herbalism, the art of creating medicines from plants. They used these natural remedies to help ease everyday illnesses such as stomach aches and headaches. Mothers prepared their own home remedies to reduce a child's fever. The Egyptians wrote much of their medical knowledge down on papyrus. The ancient Greeks and Romans used these records centuries later. As we've completed this video, there's a few questions you should be able to respond to. Number 1. How were the lives of Egypt's peasants ruled by the seasons? Number 2. What contributions did the Egyptians make in the medicine of astronomy? And finally, what do you think were the 2 most important developments of ancient Egyptian culture? Please make sure to think about and explain your reasoning. After you've thought about and come up with the answers to these questions, make sure all of your answers have been completed on your homework through the Google Classroom, and don't forget to turn in. We'll see you in class tomorrow.